So welcome to day 3. It's hard to believe this is our last full day together after all the preparation that goes into this meeting. You get here and then it's like almost like a match. Like it lights and then it's like out very quickly. So it just goes so fast. But we do value the time that we get to spend with you so much. It is truly the thing that we as staff look forward to the most. And I just want to take a second and I just want to thank Hope Newport, our family services manager. She joined us in 2018, and so between the in-persons and the virtuals, I think this is actually her 7th family gathering that she has put on. So it looks like it's so seamless and she makes it look so easy, but it is a ton of work and she pours her heart into it. And so just we all know how much we appreciate her, but if you have a second today to just give her a pat on the back or send her a note of thanks, she does an amazing job to do this and to get to spend this time with you. So we are, she's in the back of the room. We are grateful for you and you being here and putting together this meeting. And we are also, I do want to mention just once again how grateful we are to our sponsors, to Regeneron for serving as the visionary sponsor, to Int'l as our leadership sponsor, to Insight as our family gathering supporter, and then to Ashibio, who is new to this space, for being a friend of the family gathering. They make it possible for us to make this as affordable as possible for you, and so we're grateful to them for all they're doing in the FOP space, but also for helping support this meeting. So this morning, you are going to get an opportunity to hear from Dr. Kaplan. I was trying to remember when it felt like the Resilient Patient paper was just published, and then I looked back, and it was February, and that feels like, oh my gosh, that was like, it's almost been a year that was published. So on the IFOPA's website, when you go to our website, ifopa.org, under News and Events, you will find a link for something called FOP News. That is the place, if you are curious about what is happening in the research space, in drug development, that is the place where we post manuscripts, we post announcements about the clinical trials. So if you're ever curious, like what's kind of the history of what's been happening in FOP research, that goes back to 2016, and that's a great place for you to see that. So always know that you can find information there, and if you go there today, towards the bottom of that page, you will see a post for the findings of the Resilient Project being published. There is an editorial that was written about it there, so you can find all of the materials around what Dr. Kaplan is going to be sharing with you this morning under FOP News on the IFOPA website. He's going to be talking about the power of what one patient's story can tell us about research. So I just want you to think about that today as you're thinking, like, should I donate to the biobank? Yes, because the power of one patient is important. Should I do the patient insight survey that Ed mentioned yesterday? Yes. Should I do the health literacy and access survey? Yes. Should I do my registry survey when it comes out? Yes, because each of you has a unique story to tell about your FOP experience. And it just so happens that this one is really sort of a bombshell, but we're going to turn the floor over now to Dr. Kaplan to share with us about that.
Good morning, good morning. It's nice to have a snow day. No school. I listened to the radio this morning. So that's the most important thing. I want to also thank Hope. Thank you very much for asking me to speak today. And thank you also to Christy Gonzalez for organizing the clinics. We really appreciate that. They ran seamlessly, and thank you very much. And I think everybody owes a round of applause. It's a real pleasure to be here and see old friends and families, and it's just a warm feeling to be here and see everybody, because we've been on this journey for a long time. I'd like to welcome all the new families as well, and it's a joy to meet all of you. I know you wish you didn't have to be here, but thank you for coming, and it's great to see everybody. This morning, I'm going to talk about the power of one. My disclosures, I think we have to say that. I'm a research investigator for Int'l, Insight, Regeneron, and Ashibio at the University of Pennsylvania. I'm on the advisory board of the IFOPA and founder and past president at ICC. And there are absolutely no financial conflicts of interest. So if I mention anything, there's no financial conflicts of interest at all. I think I'm going to deviate from what I usually do. I usually give an overview of what's gone on in research. But I'd like to give a personal account of what I think has gone on in my life and what is important. And there are many, many examples that I think researchers can give. And if other researchers were to give the same talk, they would probably have other powers of one, people that really inspired their career and helped move things forward. But some of you are maybe familiar with Bryce Courtenay's book and movie, Power of One. And the lesson is a single life can make a difference and change the lives of many, many people. And so the title of my talk really is FOP, the Power of One. And every major discovery and advance in FOP has been really informed and inspired by patients and families. And you've shared your story with us, and we're still learning. And you come to clinic, and you ask us questions, we listen to you, and you tell us things that are very, very important. We take those back to the laboratory, and they're often dissected into different pathways, molecularly and cellularly, and we come up with different conclusions. And as William Osler said more than 150 years ago, clinics are laboratories of the highest order. This is a picture from the first FOP symposium that we held in Philadelphia in 1991. You can see Dr. Zasloff there in the middle of his tie on. He introduced me to a child with FOP. And that was the first, the Power of One that I want to talk about. And the lesson was that this was the child that he introduced me to. I had met two adults with FOP. This was in 1988. And I had met two adults with FOP, but I never saw a child with FOP. I saw what FOP did, but I didn't see what FOP does until I met this child. And I could see the lumps and bumps and the flare-ups and the toes that are a signature of FOP. And I learned from this that the battleground of FOP is really childhood. It's not adulthood. It's not taking away bone. It's preventing bone from forming in the first place. And like I said yesterday, June Osborne from the University of Michigan said, when prevention is done absolutely right, absolutely nothing happens. At that time, we didn't know that FOP was a genetic condition. Believe it or not, we didn't know that. There was some evidence in the literature, some suggestion, I should say, in the literature that FOP might be a genetic condition, but there was no evidence until we met this family, and this was also the Power of One. And the lesson was FOP is a genetic condition. The Smith family, dad had FOP, mom did not, and he transmitted it to all three children, and because there was a father-to-son transmission, and dads only give the Y chromosome, we knew that the gene for FOP could not be on the X chromosome. So we learned a lot from this family, but we still had 22 chromosomes to go, and billions and billions of base pairs of DNA. The Power of One, like Michelle said, is really in your hands. And for many years, for 15 years, you gave us the lesions. Before FOP was diagnosed properly, unfortunately, many people had biopsies, and we learned from those biopsies how bone formed, by what process bone formed. We also knew that it was okay to take blood as long as we didn't go deep into the deeper tissues of the body, and we could take blood, and that helped us. That could help us find the gene. And also, you give us teeth, loose teeth, and from those teeth, we could take the dental pulp, and depending on how we cultured them, we could make those fibrous tissues or cartilage tissues or bone tissues, same pathway that FOP takes when it forms bone. So all those donations that you gave over the years helped us, and without you, we would not have found the gene. The technology wasn't there in those days to find the gene like it is now. Maybe a high school student could find it in several weeks now, but it took us many, many years to find the gene because we didn't have the technology that's there. Anyway, we did find the gene, and we, by making a guess at what types of genes might be abnormal, And we also found 7 multi-generational families around the world, which I traveled and got the blood and brought them back to the laboratory, and we mixed and matched, and by genetic linkage analysis and by functional analysis, we did find the gene. This is a picture of Mei-Chi Su, one of the scientists in our lab. For many years, Dr. Shore and I would ask Mei-Chi to, this could be a gene, that could be a gene, and it wasn't the gene for FOP. Finally, we did find the gene, and it took a committed patient and family in a worldwide FOP community to find the gene. So on the left-hand side, you see the paper, you see Mei-Chi, and several days later, the journal Science published an editorial, bone disease gene finally found. And they said, basically, what took you so long? And it was a tongue-in-cheek comment, and they said it really takes a community to find. It took a community to find this gene. It took all of you to find it. When we found the gene, when we announced it, we had a press conference, and the next day, the Philadelphia Inquirer published on the front page of the newspaper a picture of Stephanie Snow from Santa Maria, California. The Snow family was instrumental in raising money to find the gene. They had many, many fundraisers over the years, and in fact, there was someone in the Santa Maria, California community who owned a Shell gas station, and he was so impressed by the Snow family and by the effort to find the gene that he said, I'm going to donate a penny for every gallon of gasoline that's sold. He put the competitors out of business, and he donated $180,000 to our effort to find the gene for FOP. And the lesson here is a genetic breakthrough for our bodies turning to bone. A picture of Stephanie Snow on the front page of the Inquirer. And with that knowledge, with the gene discovery, we went from the backwaters to the mainstream. This really took hold when the New York Times published an article on the front page, not of the newspaper, but on the front page of the science section of the New York Times. And Mike Mason wrote an article, and the headlines that he wrote was fine. And I love this headline. It's finally. It's a sense of exasperation. Finally, with genetic discovery, hope for escape from a prison of bone. And it was Hayden Fife's picture on that article. You see Hayden there. He just passed away recently. It was Hayden's hope. It was our hope that we would find the gene for FOP. And the FOP gene became a powerful target for drug discovery. And there was some interest, hardly any, in the pharmaceutical community in the FOP gene prior to 2006 when we discovered that. But it soared. It just absolutely soared in 2006 after finding the gene. And there are 13 companies now, 13 pharmaceutical companies that are developing treatments for FOP. And you saw some of them represented yesterday. You see them here as well, and we're very grateful for that. Soon thereafter, Fishman and Porter published an article in the journal Nature that said, a new grammar for drug discovery. And they said, very important article, and they said, to realize the potential of the genome for identifying candidate drugs, we must move beyond individual genes and proteins. The signaling pathways in the cells provide the right level for such analysis. And so immediately when we discovered the gene, as Dr. Pignolo showed yesterday, we not only knew the gene that caused FOP, we unveiled an entire pathway. And we knew that. And many people, hundreds of people, maybe thousands of scientists had been working on this pathway, but they didn't know that this pathway was responsible for a terrible catastrophic disease like FOP. So we discovered the bullseye of the pathway, and we immediately knew many targets, and immediately could hypothesize potential treatments which have been and are being developed for FOP. One of the powers, but we knew that there was more than the gene. We knew that something triggered this. Something triggered FOP. It was not enough. It wasn't sufficient just to have the gene for FOP. Something triggered inflammatory progression or something triggered the progression of bone. And what I learned from Carol, as you see here, is that FOP lesions are inflammatory. I learned this back in the late 80s, early 90s. She had a very inflammatory FOP lesions. And what I learned from Joe, as you see here, was he had a biopsy very early on, before FOP was diagnosed, and we retrieved it. And it was probably the earliest indication we had of inflammation in FOP. You can see there in the center of this diagram, that's V, it's a vessel, and around the vessel, all those dark spots are inflammatory cells, mast cells, macrophages, neutrophils. They come from the bone marrow. They're inflammation cells, and they spread out into the muscle, kill the muscle, stimulate the stem cells, and make heterotopic bone. We now know what those stem cells are from other scientists who've done amazing work in this field. But we learned from Joe the power of one from this biopsy that inflammation was a key to these lesions. And we learned from Freddie, this is a very, very powerful story. We published this, that Freddie had FOP. When he had a raging FOP until he was 7 years old. And then it stabilized. And at the time it stabilized, he became more anemic, more pale, and he developed infections and bleeding. All those indicate that there's something wrong with the blood. And it was tested, and it was found that his blood count was very low. He had almost no inflammatory cells and almost no platelets. And he had a bone marrow biopsy, which didn't cause bone to form, and it was found that his immune system had pooped out. It's called aplastic anemia. It had nothing to do with FOP, but we thought, but you can't live without an immune system. And when his immune system pooped out, his FOP plateaued, and then it decreased. Well, you can't live without an immune system, so you have to give him an immune system. So he got a bone marrow transplant from a healthy sister who didn't have FOP. And almost immediately thereafter, the new bone marrow began to attack his skin and his liver. And so he was immunosuppressed for 15 years because you can't have the new immune system attacking the rest of your body. And over 15 years, the immune system, the skin lesions and the liver became very quiet. He was tapered from the immune suppressants. And I didn't know him at the time. He was followed by hematologists, and they discharged him. And about 3 months later, the FOP went wild, and he ossified almost everything. When I saw him, it was clear that from blood tests that we did, and he had he had some bone removed prior to us meeting him. It was clear that all the connective tissues in his body had the FOP gene, but the immune system did not. And so he was a chimera. He was a mixture of normal and abnormal cells. And we realized at that time that there's something in the immune system that triggers FOP. You need the immune system. When the immune system was quiet at first, when he had the aplastic anemia, his FOP went quiet. And when the immune suppressed him, it went quiet. But it's sort of lethal to not have an immune system. And this taught us a very important lesson, that even non-FOP inflammatory cells can trigger FOP in a patient who has FOP. I'm going to take a pause here and just take a sip of water. And then tell you an amazing story. So this resonated with me for 5 years. There's something in the immune system. And since then, there are many, many studies that have done. Dr. Shao talked about them yesterday. We know that inflammation triggers FOP. But we can't just eliminate the immune system because that would be fatal. And so, but we learned from Carol and Joey and Freddie that there's something that's non-FOP in the immune system that can trigger FOP. This is a remarkable story about when he was 21 years of age, a healthy gentleman, very healthy, a little stiffness in his neck, but otherwise he was very healthy. He grew up, played sports, he had no infections, grew up normally, had a normal job, And he had a viral illness and some nausea and vomiting. And several weeks later, he developed a swelling in his neck. He went to a local doctor, 21-year-old man, presents to a local physician, has a swelling in his neck. The doctor thinks it's maybe a lymph node cancer. So he sent him to a surgeon for a biopsy. The surgeon biopsied the lesion. It wasn't a lymph node at all. It was, the pathologist said it was fibromatosis. He saw some inflammation in there, but he said, it was a very smart pathologist from Alabama, and he said, from the university, and he said, it could be an early FOP lesion. How he knew about FOP, I don't know. Maybe he learned about it in medical school. And so the report went back to the physician, and the physician said, I don't know what FOP is. It's a genetic condition. You ought to see a geneticist. So we went to see the geneticist. The geneticist looked at his toes. They were abnormal. And he didn't form any bone after the biopsy. And the geneticist said, this could be FOP. So he did a genetic test, and it came back, he had the classic FOP mutation. He did not have one of the 3 or 4% variants. He had the classic mutation of FOP. And so the young man said to him, well, what should I do about it? And he said, go to Philadelphia. There's a guy there that'll tell you what to do. So he came to Philadelphia, and I saw him at the time with a medical student across the hall, and I said, he doesn't have FOP. He's walking. He's 21 years old. I mean, I've never seen someone who's 21 who looks like that, who has FOP. And then I looked at his chart, and I saw the genetic test, and I saw his toes when he came in the office. And at that time, he was asymptomatic and healthy. And I said, I didn't believe the genetic test, and I did another test. And I did it again, and it was positive. And I said to him, listen, you lived with this for 21 years. I don't want to scare you. I don't want to tell you, but I want to tell you to be careful. Don't have dental work. Don't have any intramuscular injections. And my God, if you have any swellings, please call me, and I'll tell you what to do. Don't go and have them biopsied. And so I saw him again when he was 26. He came in, and I sort of held my breath, and I said, is something wrong? And he said, no, I just happened to be passing through the area, and I thought I'd stop in to see. Everything's been fine over the last 5 years. So when he was 26, I said, something is unusual. I've seen almost 1,000 patients with FOP, and I never saw anybody who was 26 that looked like that. So this is a video when he was 26. If we can play the video, Vicki.
Hi, I'm Andrew Davis. I'm 26 years old. I live in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm now going for a theater degree at the University of Alabama. I was recently diagnosed with FOP at the age of 21, and it really didn't affect me until then.
Can you, Andrew, can you look up at the ceiling? And can you look down? And turn to the left? And to the right? Good. Let's see you bring your arms up over your head. Can you do that? That's excellent. And let's see you extend your elbows and bend them up. Good. And your wrists back and down like this. Good. And let's see you may need to hold on to the wall here. And let's see you bend one hip up and extend it. Good. And let's see you bend the other hip up and extend that. That's excellent. And let's take a quick look at your thumbs. You can see that he lacks. Can you bend them down? Lacks the joint, interphalangeal joint. About 50% of FOP. We may take a look at your toes. It's actually just one toe. Yeah. Very good. Okay, and can you bend that for me? You can see he's missing the joint. Terrific. Thanks very much.
Yes, sir. No problem.
Stephen Friend from the from Children's Hospital said, We study those who are sick, but if we're trying to develop therapies for prevention, maybe we should study those who don't get sick, those who stay well. And he and Chat wrote an article in the journal Science, and they said clues from the resilient. Genetic information from individuals who do not succumb to disease may point to new therapies and ideas about wellness. And they said, understanding how individuals remain healthy, resilient to disease, may provide insight into disease causes, pathogenesis, and new treatments. So we refer to him as patient R. You saw his name, Andrew. He wants to be named, so we know now that it's Andrew, but in the paper we refer to him as patient R. R stands for resilient. Patient R has the classic developmental findings of FOP, but a paucity of postnatal heterotopic ossification. You can see his abnormal toes, and you can see a survey there of his skeleton. He has almost no heterotopic bone. And the Cages score, which is an indication of the lower scores, the better, the higher scores, more affected. And the median for his age is about 18 out of 30, and he had a Cages score of 2. And you can see that he has a classic FOP mutation, the one letter out of 6 billion that causes FOP that just about everybody in the world has who has classic FOP. He volunteered for a natural history study. In the whole body CT volume, he did form some heterotopic bone. He had about 47,000 millimeters of heterotopic bone, and that remained constant over 3 years of the study. But 13 subjects in his age group had about 434,000 millimeters of bone. So he had about 10% of the bone that his peer group had, where he had 90% less heterotopic bone. And so we said there's a unique uncoupling. He had the classic congenital malformations. The FOP gene was active during embryogenesis, but it had little postnatal heterotopic ossification. The FOP gene was, in other words, the FOP gene was relatively inactive after birth. And we formed a hypothesis. We said, maybe he has an insufficient inflammatory trigger. We've known for years, and we learned from Carol and Joey and Freddie that an FOP does not turn a teddy bear into a raging grizzly bear. It turns a teddy bear into a sleeping grizzly bear, and something wakes that grizzly bear up, and that's inflammation. I showed that to you in Carol and Joey and Freddie, and there are many, many molecular studies that have been done since then that prove that and show that inflammation wakes this teddy bear up. So the question was, is it possible to identify a factor from the study of patient R that would allow us to interrupt the inflammatory trigger of FOP without shutting down the entire immune system? In other words, it's sort of like having an atom bomb sitting on your living room floor. There may be plutonium in there, but if you don't have a fuse, you can't light the bomb, and it just becomes a conversation piece. And so we did a targeted biomarker analysis of 113 plasma proteins, mostly inflammatory proteins. Bob Pignolo and I discussed this and did this over many years. We said, something is going on here, and we did a targeted analysis of these plasma proteins, and we had 38 FOP patient controls in their blood, and 38 FOP patients, and 39 control patients. We got this from the little biobank we had at the University of Pennsylvania, from the patients I had seen. And out of 113 biomarkers, the only one that was significantly different in patient R was MMP9, matrix metalloprotease 9. What the heck is MMP9? MMP9 is a matrix metalloprotease. Anything ending with ASE means it's an enzyme, means it's an enzyme, it cuts, it does something. And what it does is it cuts matrix proteins, and it liberates certain proteins that are stored in the extracellular matrix. And it contains zinc, that's the metal part of it, and it dissolves, it digests many substrates. It's one of many, 20 enzymes, and we need this to form our skeleton. There are 3 patients in the world that don't have MMP9, and actually they're okay. But they're not okay when they're born. They have 0 MMP9. But they have a mild disorder of their skeleton when they're born, but it self-corrects in several months, and then they're fine, and they live a normal, healthy life. But what does MMP9 do? It's secreted by inflammatory cells, by neutrophils, by macrophages, by lymphocytes, by mast cells. And it regulates inflammatory proteins, including the one that Ed talked about yesterday called IL-beta, interleukin-1 beta. It modulates multiple inflammatory pathways, and it promotes inflammatory cell attraction. Cells attract each other, and it causes inflammatory cell infiltration. So it causes the inflammatory cells to leave the blood vessels and attack different tissues, and it orchestrates inflammatory cell differentiation. You get the picture that has something to do with inflammation. And it degrades and remodels the extracellular matrix. So it's very, very important in healing and in forming scar tissue. And it orchestrates the migration of tissue progenitor cells, or stem cells, in a large spectrum of normal and pathological processes. And so we asked the question, what is patient R's actual MMP9 levels? And you can see here from the graph that on the right-hand side, we see a range in control patients, and the FOP patients have the same range. So there's really no difference between FOP patients and controls. But patient R has very, very low levels of MMP9. And this is what we call a logarithmic graph. If it was an arithmetic graph, patient R's MMP9 levels are so low that we couldn't fit it on the same graph. And we also asked, is the MMP9 that he makes, is it active? And we found out that it was only about half as active as the normal MMP9. So we had less MMP9, and it was quite inactive. And we said, why? Why does he have less MMP9? So we sequenced his entire exome, his entire genome, and we found out that, in fact, he had 2 mutations in the MMP9 gene. One from his mother who was fine, and one from his father who was fine. And in fact, he has a brother who is fine, who also has these MMP9 mutations, but his brother doesn't have FOP. And so we thought, what are these mutations doing? And one of these mutations that came from his mother, the A20V mutation, is right at the beginning of the protein. And we asked a structural biologist to look at this, and he said, well, it might decrease the levels a little bit, but it's probably not that important. But his father's MMP9 level, the gene for MMP9 from his father, is right in the middle where the scissors cuts. It's sort of like taking a scissors and bending it. It won't cut. It won't cut well. And so we said, So we asked the question, does his mother's or father's MMP9 level mutation cause these problems? In order to do that, we used a complex system that you probably heard about in the local press called CRISPR-Cas9. We took those 2 mutations from his parents, and we introduced them with CRISPR-Cas9. We edited the genome of monocytes, which are inflammatory cells in the blood, and we made them into tissue inflammatory cells called macrophages, and then we differentiated them into inflammatory and non-inflammatory macrophages. And we found that his mother's copy of the gene decreased the level of MMP9 by a little bit, but his father's decreased it by about a half, as you see there in the graph. And the structural biologist, as I said, predicted that the father's level decreased the enzymatic activity, not just the level, but actually the activity of the MMP9 as well. And we studied this, again, by CRISPR-Cas9. Again, not looking at levels, but activity. Did it cut? And so this is a different type of analysis. And we found his mother's copy of the gene didn't really affect the activity of the MMP9 much, but his father's level affected it. His father's copy of the gene affected it dramatically by about a half. So we knew that that patient R had less MMP9 and he had less active MMP9 than normal. But why? not why, but did this have anything to do with his extra bone formation? So we didn't know at that point. Take another sip of water. So at that point, Bob and I, with the help of Vitaly Lunev, who I'll show later, we said, we need to test this out. This young man has lower MMP9 levels, and it's less active, and he has less heterotopic bone, but do his MMP9 levels have anything to do with extra bone? So in order to do that experiment, we got mice from the Jackson Laboratory, which produces different mice, and those mice have no MMP9. Much like the humans that have no MMP9, they also have a mild disorder of their skeleton when they're born, but it self-corrects in several weeks, and they're fine. And so we got these mice, healthy mice, and we made them to FOP mice. So we had FOP mice that had no MMP9, none. We also mated the mice. We did some experiments and mated the mice. So we had FOP mice that had half the levels of MMP9. Let's take a look at the right graph for a moment. We see there that in the mice that had no MMP9, their MMP9 levels, in fact, were nil, nothing. In the mice that had half the FOP mice that we suspected had half levels of MMP9, we see about half, and we see the control levels we see that the control mice, the FOP mice that had normal MMP9, we see what those levels are. So, in fact, they did. And then we caused inflammation in those mice, and what happened? Well, let's look at the left-hand graph. It was quite amazing to us. The mice that had normal MMP9 levels, the FOP mice that had normal MMP9 levels, formed heterotopic bone. We can see that. Bone, volume, and they formed bone. The mice that had no MMP9 did not form any, and we were astonished by this. We said, I wonder about the mice that had half the levels. Again, no heterotopic bone. And we didn't believe the results. We thought something was wrong. And so we repeated the experiment again, and we got the same results. And we basically saw that if we abolish MMP9, we promote regeneration of skeletal muscle in the injured mice. You can see that on the right-hand side. And on the left-hand side, you form bone. The red stuff is bone. And we see bone formation there. And on the right-hand side, you see normal muscle regeneration. And at 2 weeks, you can see the muscle trying to regenerate. Those little dark spots are in the middle of the muscle cells, and they're regenerating. And the mice form normal muscle, and they are injured just like we would be injured if we didn't have FOP, and they're okay. And we said, well, when is MMP9 made? And we looked at these mice, and it's made amazingly a maximum amount at day 1 after the injury, and by day 3 it starts to go down, and by day 5 it goes almost down to normal. It takes about 2 weeks to form extra bone, and it takes a week or more to see extra bone in these animals or on the x-rays. So the MMP9 levels go down very, very quickly, and so the decision, we believe, to make extra bone is made probably in the first day or so, maybe in the first hours after inflammation. And so we didn't believe these results, and we said, is there anything else that, is there a drug available that reduces MMP9 levels? And so we did a Google search, and amazingly, we found that tetracycline class of antibiotics decreases MMP9 levels, and it has nothing to do with their antibiotic properties, but in addition, they decrease MMP9 levels. They also decrease other MMPs, but they decrease MMP9 levels, and they decrease both the making of MMP9 by the gene. It's not made into the protein properly, and it's not secreted. And it's at very low doses of this medication that it works. And it confers resilience to diverse inflammatory conditions, which I didn't know at the time, in which MMP9 has a pathologic role, such as aortic aneurysms. And in fact, his father's mutation, the D165N mutation in the MMP9, is extremely rare, and it was studied in aortic aneurysms. And people that have that, that have that mutation, it's very, very rare, seem to be protected from aortic aneurysms. People that have low MMP9 levels that are treated with tetracycline also have, in the mice anyway, have improvement of their muscular dystrophy. It's people that are treated with tetracyclines also have, there's some improvement of multiple sclerosis, and it also helps ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. So it improves muscle regeneration in all these individuals, in all these models of the disease, and as we'll soon see, it also diminishes heterotopic bone in a mouse model. So we took minocycline, which is a type of tetracycline, and we gave it to mice that had FOP, and again, no bone. On the bottom half, we took the minocycline, and we gave it to mice that have what we call a constitutively active mutation. You heard yesterday from Ed that you need activin A. Activin A is very important in forming heterotopic bone, but these mice with the 207D mutation, which doesn't exist in humans, by the way, it's lethal, it doesn't exist in humans, and we can make mice that have this mutation. The minocycline also works. They do form some heterotopic bone, but even without activin A, they form less heterotopic bone. So you may need activin A to form heterotopic bone, but minocycline seems to protect you as well. Not completely, but it does protect you from heterotopic ossification. Again, we didn't believe these results. And as we asked, when we treat patients with minocycline, or I'm sorry, not patients, when we treat mice with minocycline, do we reduce injury-induced heterotopic ossification? So we treated these mice 3 days before we injured them, before we gave them an inflammatory injection. We treated them at the time, day 0, 1 day afterwards, 3 days afterwards, and 5 days afterwards with minocycline. And we can see that you have to treat the mice almost immediately to decrease their risk of heterotopic bone formation. And again, this supports the conclusions that we saw that MMP9 works very, very early in heterotopic bone formation. Again, we didn't believe these results in the mice, and so we asked our friends at a pharmaceutical company who made an antibody to MMP9 that they experimented and did clinical trials in over 1,000 patients, as you heard yesterday from Debbie. We said, do you have a mouse copy of this antibody, a mouse version of this antibody that we could try on these mice, because these results are sort of unbelievable to us. And they said, well, the mouse antibody doesn't work as well as the human antibody. It's not as powerful, but they made some antibody and said, why don't you try it out, at least proof of concept. And so you can see there that, again, proof of concept that the MMP9 antibody, the blocking antibody that blocks MMP9 in mice decreases injury-induced heterotopic ossification in FOP mice, both in the mice that have the classic version of FOP and in the consistently active form of FOP, which we don't see in humans. So MMP9 inhibition by genetic, by pharmacologic, or biologic means in multiple FOP mouse models abrogates or lessens, in fact, maybe prevents trauma-induced heterotopic ossification and leads to regeneration of injured skeletal muscle. And so we asked why? Why does it do that? And so again, we went to the CRISPR-Cas9 method, and we looked at the 2 copies of the gene in patient R, and we said, do they inhibit secretion of activin A? We know that activin A is very important in forming heterotopic bone. And interestingly, at least in this analysis, both his mother's and his father's copy dramatically decreased activin A levels in patient R. And we did an experiment in the mice, and we said, what happens to activin A in the mice? Activin A is stored it's secreted a little bit by the mice, and it's stored in the matrix, in the tissue, in the tissues. It's sort of like, imagine a bank account, and you deposited money in the bank, but you couldn't get it out. It doesn't do you any good. I mean, you could have $1 million, but if you can't get it out, you can't spend it. And that's exactly what we saw here. The activin A was produced and it was stored, but you couldn't get it out of the bank. It was stored in the matrix of the muscle. And compared to normal mice that had wild type, FOP mice that had normal MMP9, we saw that MMP9 could be released from the matrix and probably activate the pathways that form bone. This is a picture of Marshall Urist. Talk about Power One. Marshall Urist discovered the bone morphogenetic protein pathway back in 1965. The genes at that time weren't discovered because the technology wasn't there. But he said there's 4 cardinal requirements for forming endochondral heterotopic ossification. That's how bone forms in FOP. In any context, whether it's FOP or any context, you need an inflammatory trigger. You need something to trigger this atom bomb. You need an inductive signal. You need something a signal to form it. You need a progenitor cell to orchestrate this, and you need a conducive microenvironment, which is the matrix of the tissues. And MMP9 likely functions in all 4 domains in FOP. And as you can see here from the cartoon, injury is caused, and it causes inflammation. We know that. Macrophages, mast cells, I showed here macrophages, but mast cells, neutrophils are released, and they all release MMP9. Patient R, genetic knockdown or elimination of MMP9, pharmacological inhibition of MMP9, or biologic inhibition by a monoclonal antibody, all inhibit MMP9. And we hypothesize that MMP9 acts on the extracellular matrix. It also perhaps releases some activin A, although you don't need activin A in this context. And it activates the FAF cells, and it produces a conducive microenvironment and a signal and progenitor cells. This is a hypothesis slide, and it causes a bone to form in FOP. This is what we hypothesize. But there's a dramatic amount of work that needs to be done in the mechanisms of how MMP9 works. This is just a hypothesis at this point. So how does one build a second skeleton of FOP? So ACVR1 is really the architect. It's not the builder of FOP, it's the architect. And in one chapter of the book of Moby Dick, where they're talking about whales, the different classification of whales, there's a quotation. I love this quotation. It says, "I am the architect, not the builder." And we can see the mutation there. The arrow points to the mutation. One copy of the gene is abnormal. And he says, "I am the architect, not the builder." And ACVR1, the mutant ACVR1 that causes FOP, is really architect, not the builder. MMP9 is a general contractor. I should modify this slide. It's not the general contractor, but it's a general contractor. And it orchestrates the building of the second skeleton. And it probably does so by its enormous number of substrates in the matrix, in the inflammatory cells, by causing the release of activin A, and by activating the progenitor cells. But again, this is to be proven. And so the conclusion is MMP9, which is an inflammatory protein, links inflammation to HO, heterotopic ossification. It orchestrates an existential role in the pathogenesis and the cause of FOP. It illustrates that one patient's, Andrew, patient R, that one patient's clinical phenotype, clinical condition, reveals critical molecular mechanisms of disease that unveils novel treatment strategies. And so MMP9 can be added to this list now, can be added to this program that we see, and it links inflammation, as we see here in the dash box, to heterotopic bone. It links inflammation to heterotopic ossification, and it's a target, a new target for for decreasing heterotopic ossification. And we published this in a paper, as Michelle said, in the Journal of Bone and Mineral Research back in February of this year. And matrix metalloprotease 9, MMP9 deficiency, confers resilience in FOP in a man, that's patient R, Andrew, and in mice. And there was an editorial written about that, about the paper we published, Actionable Disease Insights from Bedside to Bench. Not from bench to bedside. This started in the clinic, not in the laboratory, but in the clinic. We took it back to the laboratory, and we hope to bring it back to the clinic as a treatment, as an option, from bedside to bench in FOP. And as in a book called Happy Accidents, I love this book. It's called Serendipity and Modern Medical Breakthroughs. And you see the man looking through the telescope at the stars, and his wife is sort of patting on the back and probably saying, no, dear, don't look through the telescope. This is more important. Look here. And as Abby Loeb, an astrophysicist from Harvard, said, if you don't allow for surprises, you won't learn something new. The power of one. What is the power of one? The power of one, I just showed you the power of one. The power of one individual to illuminate a new pathway, a new target for FOP. And I want you to meet a superhero of the resilient. That's Andrew. And you see him here in the picture. You see his mother, Lorna, there to his left, or to the left in the picture. You see Mona El Makadam. You see Dr. Pignolo, my colleague and partner in this work for many, many years, on the far right. And I want to thank Vitaly Lunev in our department, who did most of the mouse work on this study and did all the CRISPR-Cas9 work that I showed you. And I also want to thank Bob for his magnificent work and contribution to this study and the tremendous discussions we had over the years about this. This work was funded by two families, really, the Martucci family, the Ashley Martucci Fund at the University of Pennsylvania. It was a Martucci IFOPA fundraiser, and you see there Ashley Martucci in the middle in the wheelchair, and her mother, her aunt also pictured, and her father. And on the right you see her father's two sisters, Joanne and Donna, and their respective husbands. They ran a series of incredible fundraisers in New York City, finding a cure, and that money we used to fund this work. We also are very, very grateful to Amanda Kelly and her family at the Radiant Hope Foundation and the Incali Fund for funding this work. This resilience project, we call it, really addresses 6 of the 7 IFOPA priorities that they set out several years ago. We studied biomarkers to do this. We studied genetic modifiers to do this study. We studied immune system and inflammation. That gave us the clue, the power of one, to study inflammation. How does inflammation trigger this, or prevent the trigger of this bone formation in patient R, in Andrew? We studied new druggable targets, MMP9. We studied repurposed drugs like tetracyclines, and we studied muscle regeneration as well. So we studied 6 of the 7 FOP priorities. What's next in the clinic? A clinical trial with a monoclonal antibody against MMP9, which you heard yesterday about from Debbie Wankert from Asher Bio. And we also hope, if funding becomes available at some point, and it'll be very expensive, to do real clinical trials. You can go to the drugstore and get tetracycline, but we don't know, and we don't advocate that use. It's because we don't know what dose to use, we don't know how long to use it, we don't know what recurrences there will be if we stop the tetracycline derivatives. This all needs to be studied in a clinical trial, not accidentally or individually by FOP patients. So we need a clinical trial with available and affordable drugs that inhibit MMP9. And the good news is that the tetracyclines are not the only class of medications that inhibit MMP9. Metformin does. It's a drug used in diabetes, maybe not as powerful as some of the tetracycline derivatives, but there are others as well. And I think in the coming years, we'll find other drugs that also inhibit MMP9. It's very interesting that prednisone that we use also inhibits MMP9, but we can only use it for a very short period of time, and then there's a rebound effect if we stop it. So you can see there in the diagram that Bob showed yesterday that we're soon going to enter into the clinical trial era with a monoclonal antibody called indeclizumab, which inhibits MMP9, the human antibody, which inhibits MMP9 and links inflammation to heterotopic bone formation. And so the power of one, what is the power of one? The power of one extends beyond Andrew. As Michelle said, the power of one is the lesson. The lesson is you, clinical trials. Every single person that contributes to clinical trials is important in this pursuit. And everyone contributes something. Clinical trials are research studies that help determine the safety and effectiveness of an intervention. And it's done in humans, it's done in you, it's done in patients. And so, but every patient that's brave enough to enter a clinical trial contributes to that. For maybe not for themselves, maybe yes, maybe no, but certainly for future generations. And that should all inspire all of us to help, whether you contribute to clinical trials or to the research registry or to the biobanks, you all contribute. So the lesson is you, as Michelle said, the power of one. You can make a difference, and you can make a difference in what you do. I just want to say, like in any movie, there's always credits at the end. I cannot finish this presentation without crediting the people that made all this work possible. This is a picture of Diane Weiss on the right, and a picture of her as a child on the left in the pool. And she realizes that FOP is really, the battleground for FOP is really childhood. She established the professorship that allows me to do this work at Penn. I also want to thank Amanda Calley. Amanda doesn't get as much press and recognition as she deserves because she's very quiet. She does these things quietly. I won't read all these things. She's done enormous things for the FOP community. I've known Amanda for many years, and there's no one that has contributed to our international effort and our efforts to find a cure more than Amanda has. So I want to thank Amanda. And I couldn't end a presentation on FOP without thanking the ultimate architect of all of this, and that's Jeannie Pieper, who established the FOP organization around the same time that we established the research, the FOP connection to connect people, and that's why we're all here. And as Charles Taylor said, to experience a strong sense of connection, deeply felt, a connection which flows through us and our FOP world. And as President Kennedy said more than 60 years ago, one person can make a difference, and everyone should try. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kaplan. Okay, we maybe have time for one question. Now, you know that Dr. Kaplan loves to sit and chat with you, so he'll be here through tomorrow, so there'll be lots of chances if you want to, in a one-on-one opportunity, ask him a question as well. But is there anyone that has one question? If not,
I think there was a question yesterday
about this trial.
About the trials.
Yeah.
We don't have those trials yet, but hopefully we will have a trial with hopefully there will be a trial with repurposed drugs that can be used.
Yeah, so that's great. So do be watching the IFOPA social media and our e-newsletters, the Pulse, FOP Connection, and community updates. As soon as the trial is open and recruiting and active, we will make that announcement. So be watching. There'll be hopefully multiple sites in the United States. So be watching for those announcements from us.